Hello and welcome to No Veto Video. I'm Carson.
I'm Catherine, and it's good to have you guys along with us. This week we're watching and responding to Okja, the 2017 movie from director joon-ho, who you may have watched previous films. His big American release was Snowpiercer from a few years ago. It also stars seo-hyun. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. She's also Tilda Swinton, Paul Dano, Jake Gyllenhaal, Giancarlo Esposito, and Steven Yeun.
In Okja, we follow a young girl who falls in love with her magical giant pig.
Hijinks follow. So, like I mentioned before, we watched Snowpiercer, and then we watched The Host as a way to sort of catch up on the back catalog of this director several years ago. And I heard he was making a new film for Netflix. I thought, well, that's very interesting. And then I heard kind of some of the plot descriptions, like, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure what this is going to be like. I'm not sure how it's going to go. And so watching that and sort of just testing it out as a way to talk about, keeping up on a filmmaker who we've been following. So that's why we picked it this week. As I think about how to start the conversation, what do you think this movie is about?
Well, it could have either been a plot device or an actual message, and I'm not sure which. If it was a message, there was a very, very heavy-handed environmentalist and animal-friendly viewpoint expressed. But it could have also just been a plot device, and I'm really not sure.
And so that's for me where, sort of knowing some of the earlier works comes in. Like, Snowpiercer has some of the same themes, just dealt with in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a food horror aspect that this director likes to feature in his movies. It's in Snowpiercer, and it's in here, sort of what we eat and how what we eat sort of defines us. And so, in both of those places, in both movies, you have sort of the sense of, the more we try and mess with nature, the less well it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some of that as well. You see some of those themes definitely popping up. Is it heavy-handed sort of storytelling, if that's the message? Maybe. Probably. Yeah. For me, I hear those, but then I think what differentiates this film from Snowpiercer, for example, is to say, the role in which capitalism, the role in which money plays a part in this film, which is different than I see the food horror aspect of it. A lot of people have said after watching this movie that they want to reduce their consumption of meat, or definitely commercially produced meat. And I hear that and I see it, but I think ultimately that's not the purpose of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's trying to talk about something a little more nuanced than just, oh my god, industrial grade slaughterhouses are horrible. I mean, it's trying to say that too, but I feel like there's more to it than that.
In many ways, it's telling the age-old story of a child and their pet who get separated and the search for their pet.
Yeah, so there's that reunification, big story that gets told, and you're right, that is a common story. What's different about it in this case? Do you is it just the same old story, or is there an interesting touch because of maybe setting or director?
I think the interesting twist is that the pet in this case is more of a friend, not a pet, and seems to be as intelligent as the child.
Yeah, we didn't mention the probably office building sized crew that was responsible for bringing the CG animal to life.
Mm-hmm.
but just it's one of those places where you really get a sense of just how far we've come as CG goes. You know, like, wow, like that creature took up space in the real world, you know?
Yeah, if you didn't know anything about television or film, let's say you teleported a 18th century or 19th century person into our time, or even early 20th century, and showed them this, they might think it was just some large undiscovered creature that we've never seen. It looks so realistic.
You know, the hairs and the breath and the inside of the mouth, just an amazing creation, and really, because of its really detailed way of being, just really has just such screen presence, a real sense of character, in a way that sometimes these CG characters don't have, because they're lacking those, you know, those weightier parts of themselves. So that's a character that worked for both of us.
Yeah.
Are there characters that didn't work for you?
Some of the film crew for the news station, or the PR for the company, just felt a little extraneous. They felt like they were maybe going a bit for comic relief. For instance, when they got winded after climbing up to film Okja, that scene really just didn't work. I didn't think.
So my sense is that you're actually like highlighting the character played by Jake Gyllenhaal, the Dr. Johnny Wilcox, kind of a huckstery.
Not just him, some of the crew that was with him as well.
Yeah, and his performance is worth talking about. I think there's just something off about this guy, and in a way that sort of pulls him out from the rest of the movie. You're right, he does have this sort of comic relief clown kind of feel to him, and in some ways, though, you get a sense that he's also telling the same story that I think the film is telling, which is about sort of how things that begin beautiful, when touched by like pursuit of wealth, become ugly. And I would say that that's the message of the film, until, and a spoiler alert here, until it becomes clear at the climax of the movie, just about the very, very end of the movie, that the message might actually be, in fact, if you aren't the one holding wealth, you are powerless. Which actually takes us back to Snowpiercer. But anyway, so if you're not, like, at a certain point, it looks like all hope is lost, and there will be no good outcome. Until the little girl, who's been kind of powerless up until this point, reveals herself as to be a person of means. And suddenly all the gates open for her, and everything turns out okay. Because...
Ish.
For her, I mean, she has one clear objective through the whole film. And she meets some people who have a bigger picture objective. And we can probably talk about that a little bit, but her objective is just to go back to her mountain with her super pig. And the rest of the world can hang for all she cares. And so she gets her objective. The main character succeeds in her quest.
Referring back to the over-the-top villain character, the character kind of reminded me of the over-the-topness of some of the antagonists in Tank Girl.
Can we go back to make sure that I understand which villain character we're referring to?
The Jake Gyllenhaal character.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so Johnny Wilcox.
Yes.
Okay. So, kind of like Tank Girl in that respect for you.
For some of the villains.
Also.
The Cole Porter scene, the woman in there, and the main villain, played by McDowell. Both of them seemed a little over the top, and I realized as something based on a graphic novel that's expected, and I think it worked there. Whereas here, I think it kind of derailed what they were going for at times.
Yeah, I think ultimately he's not a villain. Like, he's villainous, but he's not.
No, he's not the big bad. No,
like he's not. He is himself in some ways a victim of what's happened in this world.
He certainly sees himself that way.
I think he genuinely is, and he's also horrible. Like, I think the two things you can exist at the same time. You know, like there is this sort of sense of like, oh, the stuff that he's doing, like, that's genuinely bad. And at one point, sort of the most horrifically violent scene takes place because of a choice his character makes that nobody was forcing him to do. And yet at the end he's a small and pathetic man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he sort of whines to himself at some point after he's done a terrible, awful thing. It's like, but I really love animals. It's like, well, that's great, but you're not acting in a way that lives out your virtue. You're acting in a way that's contrary to your virtue because you were induced to by someone that you gave up your power to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought maybe you were talking about the Lucy Miranda character, who's played by Tilda Swinton, who is comic book villainish in her own way.
Yeah.
Certainly aesthetically, there is this sort of like I don't know, Arrested Development kind of. She's a grown woman, but she kind of has the aesthetics of a teenager. In fact, she even has braces on, and it's just kind of so jarring, I guess, to see. There's a way in which her character states as her objective that she's going to, you know, make her company a better company than the company of her, you know, of her sister and father and grandfather, because those were horrible people who did terrible things, and that, like, it's a whole new day for her company.
Mm-hmm.
And yet what it turns out to be is that that's largely window dressing, and it's not ultimately 100% clear how much she's drunk her own Kool-Aid. Like, I think there's a certain point at which it's like, she may actually think that that is true.
Oh, I think she genuinely believes it.
And that's its own kind of sadness. Like, there's its own kind of sorrow about that. So but she's also sort of comically over the top.
Some of the politicking in her cabinet meetings also, where you're never sure quite who's on her side and who's not, was kind of an interesting subplot.
You definitely get the sense that she's being played by people, even really early on, that there's, you know, even the beautiful things that she wants to say aren't her own words. Mm-hmm. In fact, her very first appearance, you understand that. And within that cabinet and within that sort of inner circle of advisors, too, there's a certain sense of, like, people who are putting up with her because she's the one in power. Like, she's got the means right now to control this little group of people, but nobody likes her.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that she's really full of herself, and that, you know, her attempts at this sort of aesthetic overhaul are unwelcome. There is an interesting way in which all of these characters are kind of locked together as both perpetrator and victim within this larger system. It's very, and even the animal welfare organization that enters the picture, they are perpetrator and like, they are having their own kind of, like, weird interplay. And then, you know, there's a character who's trying to be really, really pure, and that he's decided that all food production is violation, and so he's not eating anything. And he's also useless because we have to eat. It's a thing that we as living creatures have to do in order to continue to survive. But if even eating plants is murder, you know, plant murder, You know, he's going to opt out of the system, and in so doing, he gives up his own, you know, ability to have agency for himself. At some points, he's being carried through scenes. It's like, okay, but like, you know, people gotta eat.
Yeah, maybe just not sentient things.
You know, if they're very, very tasty. No, I'm a horrible human being. And yeah, so the ethics of what we eat and how we eat are important. Of course they are. But the idea that we can just decide to not eat, that's also probably an extreme position.
Yeah. Especially when it stops you from doing anything that furthers goals you actually believe in, like saving the environment or the animals. Or
So do you want to talk about J and K?
Sure. Jay is the sort of leader of the group of animal rights activists. Kay is not only their translator for when they're in Korea, but also seems to have some technical abilities. And he's kind of indispensable, but at one point he also does something that infuriates Jay, causing not only tension within the group, but also makes their group much weaker in a number of ways.
I love their friendship. The friendship between J and K. And there's clearly a lot of respect there. The way that the conflict gets resolved is really very loving and very sweet. So the relationship between these two guys, I think, is really cute, for lack of a better term. I love this animal welfare organization. I forget their actual name. They had some sort of acronym. But it's this idea of, like, just the mildest mannered terrorists that, like, when they first are introduced, they're going to try and hijack a van, a truck. And it's just like, everyone buckle up, like, we're going to stop your truck now. And it goes from there. So I think anytime that you're spending time with that group of people, it's almost the most fun you have in the whole of this movie. They were, in a lot of respects, my own favorite character grouping.
I also wanted to bring up something else that I found over the top. The pageantry at the ending, where they were announcing, out of all the super pigs they created, which one was in fact the best super pig. It seemed like no one would do this.
So would we have a parade with floats and, like, thousands of people show up for a product launch?
And a huge sound system and blocking lots of streets in New York.
And there's a part of me that thinks that this is totally plausible.
It felt kind of Hunger Games-y to me.
It has sort of a Hunger Games-y sort of thing, but I think there's something about both of these that are grounded in reality. And that is that if you make it a contest, if you make it, if you bring up the pageantry element of it, like, I'm thinking about the ways in which American Idol and, you know, like the iPhone launches. And I'm just thinking about, there's enough in our world about, here is the best thing, and we are all gathered together to celebrate it, you know. That felt like maybe a little heightened reality, but still grounded in reality, and that idea of, like, the ways in which pageantry and competition and ritual are all used to pull the wool over all of our eyes about how things really are. And yeah, I think like take a movie show like America's Next Top Model, right? Which is this idea of like who's going to compete to become, models, and modeling it's a mixed bag. Like I'm obviously have never participated in this industry, but like from what I can read about it and what like the vast majority of people who do that is work that is often demeaning and horrible, and to pretty it up and to dress it up is sort of a competition, and we all tune in to watch. I don't know. There's just that felt within lines for me.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah. So, last thoughts?
Mostly, I think the movie worked. There were a few instances where, as we talked about, it felt like they were kind of breaking what they were doing and kind of pulling you out of it just because of the direction that it suddenly jarred into. But overall, yeah, it was a strong movie. I had no idea what I was getting into when I started it. I knew nothing about this movie other than, it's the same person who did Snowpiercer and Host. Do you have any last thoughts?
I think for me, this idea around if you are the person with means, then you have power. And like this really clear connection between money and agency that this movie kind of ends up telling the story of. And just how pervasive that thought is. And then one last thought, which is just how beautiful the scenery of the mountain where Okja grows up with Mija and grandfather, and kind of just how lovely their life up there is and how lovingly shot it is. And that section of the film is just gorgeous and really nice, and I could probably watch that on loop for a long time.
If you have also seen Okja and want to tell us that we're wrong in our interpretations,
or you can agree with us,
or add something that we may have missed, please comment down below or on the site novitovideo.com. Also, Christmas is coming up, and we plan on doing a special kind of review for Christmas. More details about that later. And I know we don't have many subscribers yet, but if you have suggestions for the 5th week in December, we would be open to hearing those. If not, we'll pick something and you'll just be subjected to our choice.
Wahahahaha. Okay, so now is the time on Novito Video when we share another movie that we think might go along or might pair well with this movie or take it off in another direction. We call it our override. So, Carson, what's your override this week?
So it's kind of a stretch, but Tank Girl, which we mentioned earlier, it's about a woman and her not really pet, more friend, Ox, and their relationship. It's kind of a subplot, but it does focus on that. Also has some of the pageantry that we talked about in this movie, some over-the-top villains, and really good writing.
Okay. I am going in a slightly different direction. Tilda Swinton in this movie plays twins. We didn't really talk about the other twin all that much, but this is not the first time that she's played warring twins. So my override recommendation this week is for Hail Caesar, the Coen Brothers movie that was released a few years back. So check out Hail Caesar and check out Tank Girl. We both recommend those films as well as Okja. So what's up for next time?
Next time we're going to tell you all about Happy Death Day, which is, at the time of the recording, going to still be at the theaters.
But by the time we release this, it'll probably be out for on-demand or like rent-to-stream from iTunes or Google Play. So look for it those places. Maybe it'll be available other places as well. All right. So thank you so much for joining us this week. It's good to always have you guys along. And please do subscribe if you'd like to. So we want to talk to you about maybe another thing that you can be letting us know, which is what is it that you celebrate at this time of year? What holidays do you observe? Are there special movies that make that holiday for you? Just between you and me, one of the things that we're thinking about doing for the December 22nd No Veto video is talking about movies that for Carson and I make our winter holidays complete. So let us know what those are in the comments, or come and find us on novetovideo.com. And we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Bye.